The train came in at 2:30, which meant most of Harlan had finished their midday meal and had reason enough to be near the platform without admitting they were near the platform. It was the 14th of March. The sky was flat and white, and the cold had an edge to it still, the kind that finds the back of your neck even when you've turned up your collar. Snow from the week before was still packed along the north side of the livery wall, gray with dust from the road. She stepped down before the porter offered a hand. She had a travel bag, dark canvas, worn at the corners, and she carried it herself. She was wearing a brown wool coat, not new, but clean and properly buttoned. And she stood on the platform boards and looked at the town with the expression of someone doing an honest accounting. Not disappointed, not hopeful, simply looking. He was already there. He was standing a few feet back from the edge of the platform, not in the cluster of onlookers who had found reasons to be nearby, but separate from them. Tall, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that belongs to men who have spent years working alone. His hat was on his head, not in his hands. He crossed to her in 4 steps and extended his hand. She took it. "Train was on time," he said. "It was," she said. That was the whole of the greeting. He reached for the travel bag without asking, and she let him take it, and they walked together off the platform toward the road. Behind them, the small cluster of watchers watched. At the edge of the platform, he stopped and turned partly toward her, not quite looking at her directly. "I want to say the terms plain," he said, "so there's no confusion later." She waited. 3 months. You stay, you help with the girls, you have room and board. End of 3 months. If either of us finds it wanting, I put you on the train back to Denver. June 14th. No debt between us, no hard feeling. And if it isn't wanting, he looked at her then we talk about what comes next. She nodded once. He nodded once. They walked. The town was not much. A general store, a saloon, a livery, a church with a frame for the steeple, but no steeple yet. The road ran straight through it and opened out on the far end into country that was flat and wide and not finished with winter. She looked at the church as they passed it. "No steeple," she said. "Not yet," he said. Inside her travel bag, packed between 2 changes of clothing and a folded piece of oilskin, was a small tin candle holder, dented on one side. It had been her mother's. She had wrapped it carefully in a cloth before she left Ohio, and she had not thought about it once on the train, which surprised her. She thought about it now. The house sat a 1/4 mile past the edge of town, set back from the road behind a fence that needed paint. 2 cottonwoods stood in the yard, bare still, the branches making a thin gray pattern against the sky. She noted the fence. She noted the trees. He opened the door and let her through first. The kitchen was larger than she had expected. A good stove, well used, and a window above the dry sink that faced south. The table was set for no one. 4 chairs, one with a crack along the back leg, a coffee cup left from the morning still sitting near the edge. She set her bag down without being asked. "Upstairs," he said. "Your room is at the end of the hall." She followed him up. The room was small and clean in the way a room is clean when someone has made an effort without quite knowing what they were making an effort for. The quilt on the bed was faded but whole, a lamp on the nightstand, a peg on the wall for hanging. She said it would do. He left her there and she heard him speak, low, to someone below. Then the sound of small feet on the stairs, 2 sets of them, and then nothing. Whoever had started up had stopped. She came back down herself. They were in the doorway to the kitchen, 4 years old, both of them, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. One watched her directly, assessing. The other looked at a point just past her, not shy, not afraid, only measuring in a way that required distance. She crouched down to be level with them. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. The bolder one nodded. The quieter one said nothing, but shifted her weight, and in her closed left hand, visible at her side, she was holding something small and smooth. A stone, pale gray, the size of a thumbnail. She did not remark on it. She stood, moved to the stove, began to understand where things were kept. That night, after supper, after the dishes, after he had settled the girls and the house had gone quiet, she took the tin candle holder out of her bag. She set it on the kitchen windowsill. She pressed it back against the glass so the light would show through when she lit it, the way her mother had always done. The tin was dented on the left side where it had fallen once, years ago, and the dent had never been hammered out because her mother said it sat flatter that way. She struck a match and touched it to the wick. In the doorway behind her, not making a sound, the quieter twin stood watching. She had come down the stairs alone and stopped at the edge of the kitchen, and she watched the candle take the flame and hold it. Neither of them spoke. The light moved once in a draft and then steadied. By morning, Mrs. Alderman at the general store had already formed a view. Mrs. Alderman's view was that the arrangement would not last the month. She did not say this unkindly. She said it the way a person states the weather, a reading of conditions, nothing personal. The woman from Ohio was too quiet, too contained. A household with 2 small girls and a man who worked dawn to dark needed someone louder in herself, more willing to fill the spaces. She was not wrong about the quietness, but she had misread what the quietness was for. The first morning, she was up before the house. She had found the coffee by reel in the dark, 3rd shelf, left side, and had the stove going before he came through from the back. He stopped at the doorway, looked at her, looked at the stove, said nothing, and sat down. She set a cup in front of him. He drank it without comment. Outside the window, the candle had burned down overnight to a stub, and the holder sat dark on the sill, the tin catching the first gray light through the glass. That evening, she noticed the loose 3rd step on the stair. By morning, it was not loose. She had not mentioned it. She had simply moved carefully around it, the way a person moves around a thing they expect to last. She stood on it once, testing, and it held without sound. She went back to the kitchen. He did not explain himself, and she did not ask him to. That was the first grammar she learned. The second was the wood. She had been measuring what was left of the stack by the door, enough for 3 cold nights, maybe 4 if the mornings stayed mild. She had not written it down, had not said anything. She had simply looked at it the way she had learned to look at supplies, calculating, accounting. 2 days later, the stack was full. She stood at the door and looked at it for a moment and then went in and started supper. The twins moved around her like water finding a path. The louder one talked in a continuous low stream about the yard, about a particular dog 3 houses down that she had opinions about whether snow would come before Easter. She required no response, only presence, and so she received presence. A hand steadying a pot, a nod when the thread of the sentence needed it. The quieter one watched. She had stopped standing at the edge of rooms and had begun appearing inside them, close enough that her shoulder was sometimes an inch from an apron hem. She did not ask for anything. She simply came nearer. On the 14th day, she placed a small gray stone on the windowsill beside the candle holder. She did it while her sister was talking, and her father was outside, and the only witness was the kitchen itself. She set it down carefully, as if placing it next to something it belonged to. Then she turned back to her breakfast. The 6th week came in cold. The ground had not yet softened, and the morning still held frost along the fence rails and the top edge of the water trough. She heard it from the general store. A woman 2 properties east had lost her baby in the night. 3rd child. The other 2 were under 5. She heard it in the way news travels in a small town, which is to say quietly, between 2 other sentences, the way serious things are always wrapped. She was back at the house before full light had settled. She built the bread without measuring, the way she had learned to do it, by hand and by feel and by the specific weight of the dough when it was right. The twins were still asleep. Shire West was already out at the fence line, a shape moving at the far edge of the yard. She wrapped the loaf and went. The woman's house was quiet in the way. Houses go quiet after something has left them. She knocked and was let in by a neighbor who looked relieved to hand the morning to someone else. She set the bread on the table. She did not say what she had come to do because there was nothing to say about it. She sat down across from the woman and stayed. The woman talked when she needed to and was silent when she needed to be, and neither one required explanation. She poured tea when the pot was ready. She washed the 2 cups when they were done. When one of the small children woke and came in frightened by the silence, she took him to her lap and held him while his mother sat. She stayed the whole morning. She came back across the field just after midday. The light was flat and the grass was still pale from winter, and she walked with her hands at her sides and her chin level. He was at the fence, restringing a section that had come loose. He heard her coming across the frozen ground and straightened and watched her approach. She did not look at him. She walked past and went inside. He stood at the fence for another moment, the wire loose in his hands. Then he turned back to the work. That evening the kitchen was ordinary. Supper, dishes, the Louder twins' account of something she had seen the neighbor's dog do that afternoon. The quieter one sat at her end of the table and said nothing, which was not unusual. But sometime after supper, while the dishes were drying and the candle was burning low in its tin holder on the windowsill, the quieter twin came to the sill and set another stone beside the first. Not against it, beside it. An inch of space between them, deliberate. She said nothing. The twin said nothing. The candle burned. Outside, the temperature was dropping again, and the first real dark of evening was coming down over the town. The weeks after that passed the way early spring does. Slowly, then all at once. The ground thawed and the mud came, and then one morning the mud was dry, and she looked up from hanging wash and realized the cottonwoods along the eastern fence had gone green while she wasn't watching. The twins' coats were too small. She let out the hems on both without asking. The louder one noticed and said, "Thank you," with the frank efficiency of a child who has learned that gratitude should be prompt. The quieter one wore hers for 3 days before she looked up from her breakfast and said, "It fits now." That was all. The work of the house had become familiar in the way that shoes become familiar. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer something she noticed wearing. She knew which floorboard announced itself before dawn. She knew that the well rope needed 2 full winds or it would jam. She knew that he drank his coffee before it had properly cooled, and that he took it to the door and stood there for a minute each morning, looking at the property before the day began. She had stopped tracking the date the way she had in the first weeks, but the 14th of June was not a date she could unlearn. It announced itself gradually, the way a sound does when you realize you have been hearing it for some time. By the first week of June, she was aware of it without thinking about it directly. By the 10th, she was thinking about it directly. She did not know what she wanted. That was the plain truth of it, and she was a woman who dealt in plain truths because she had found that the other kind cost more than they returned. She had not been unhappy. She had not been happy in the way she had imagined happiness might feel, large and clear and unmistakable. It had been smaller than that. It had been the sound of the twins sleeping. The weight of the stone, the quiet one, had set beside hers on the windowsill. On the morning of the 13th, she was awake before the light changed. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had made, without thinking about making it. The tin candle holder was on the windowsill. The candle was unlit at this hour. The room was gray and still. She was not packing. There was no bag pulled from under the bed, no dress folded for travel. She was simply sitting in the kitchen of a house that had asked nothing of her, except that she show up each morning, which she had done, which she could do, which she did not know how to stop doing even now. She heard him come in from the side room, his boots on the floor, the brief pause at the doorway. He took his hat from the peg by the door and went out to the barn without speaking. The 14th came in like any other morning. She was up before him, as she had been most mornings since March. The fire was going by the time the light changed outside. She put the kettle on and went to check on the girls, who had kicked their blankets to the floor in the night. She pulled the blankets back over them and stood in the doorway a moment, listening to them breathe. When she came back to the kitchen, he was already at the table with his coffee. He did not look at her in a way that meant anything. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, briefly and then away, as a man looks at something that has become a part of the room. She sliced bread and set it on the board. Outside, the morning was doing what June mornings did in this part of Colorado, warming slowly, the light still thin, the dirt in the yard holding the cold of the night before. A freight wagon was moving somewhere down the main road. She could hear it without seeing it. She did not think about the platform. Or she thought about it the way you think about a road you did not take, which is to say, briefly and without grief. By mid-morning, the quieter twin was in the yard with her stones, and the other was underfoot in the kitchen, asking for things she did not need. She sent her to weed the kitchen garden, and the girl went without argument, which meant she was in a generous mood, and that was useful. She started the beans in the early afternoon, salt pork from the crock, onion from the string by the door, a bay leaf from the tin on the shelf. It was not a special meal. It was Tuesday food. She made it because they would be hungry at supper, and there was salt pork, and there were dried beans, and it was Tuesday. He came in at dusk with the girls. They had been helping him with something, or following him, which was its own kind of helping. The quieter one had a new stone in her fist, gray and smooth, and she set it on the windowsill beside the candle holder without comment and went to wash her hands. They ate. The beans were good. No one said the beans were good. The other twin spilled her milk and was not scolded, and the quieter twin watched to see if she would be, and then went back to eating when she wasn't. After supper, the girls sat on the porch in the long last light until they tipped against each other and went still. She lit the candle in the tin holder as the kitchen went dark. The flame was small and steady. It had been small and steady every night since March 14th, and it was small and steady now. She washed the supper dishes. He went out to check the horses. She dried the plates and stacked them on the shelf. 3 years can move like water. Not fast, not noticed until you look back and see how far the bank has shifted. By the spring of 1874, she had mended for 6 families who could not pay. She did not keep account. She kept the scraps of cloth, sorted by weight and color, in a cedar box on the floor beside the machine, and she worked in the early morning before the girls woke, and in the late evening after they slept. He never mentioned it. She never explained it. The work was there, and she did it. The first time she carried a meal across a field, it was to a family on the western edge of the valley whose husband had broken 2 ribs coming off a horse. She had heard about it at the general store, the way you heard everything in Harlan, standing beside a barrel of flour while 2 women spoke to each other and not to you. She went home and made a double portion and walked it over that afternoon with the quieter twin at her side, because the girl had asked to come and there was no reason to say no. The woman who answered the door did not say thank you. She looked at the pot and then at the face above it and then stepped back to let them in. That was how it started. By the fall of 1875, there was a cot in the small room off the kitchen that had previously held nothing but a broken chair and a tin bucket she'd been meaning to mend. A woman from outside of town slept on it for 9 days while something at home was sorted out. She did not ask questions. She gave the woman work to do because she had found that having something to do was usually better than being held. He noticed. He said nothing. Once, he moved the broken chair out of the room without being asked, and she understood that he had understood. In 1876, in late summer, a man came to the door of the house looking for him. He was away at the eastern pasture. She told the man to wait and brought him water and asked what the trouble was. He told her. It was a trouble she knew something about. A dispute over a land boundary, paperwork, a neighbor who had been drawing his line a little wider each year. She told him to come back when he had the original survey and she would look at it with him. He came back. She looked at it with him. After that, when someone in Harlan needed sorting, they were told to speak to her. He never announced it. He simply stopped being the first name people said. He would hear someone in town asking after a problem, and he would say, plainly, "Go to the house." And they would. And she would set down whatever she was holding and listen. The candle on the windowsill burned through all of it. The winter of 1880 came early and came hard. By November, the ground was iron under 2 inches of frost, and by December, there was no ground visible at all. The passes east of Harlan closed before the last supply wagon made it through. The general store owner rationed flour quietly, without posting a notice, which was its own kind of notice to anyone paying attention. She was paying attention. She had heard, through the ordinary course of things, a woman mentioning it at the dry goods counter, a man saying it in passing to another man outside the livery, that the Greer family and the Calloway family, both of them on the edge of the county, where the road thinned out and the wind had nothing to stop it, were in trouble. Not starving yet. Close enough that the difference was a matter of weeks. She did not call a meeting. She did not write a letter or post a notice or say the word organize to anyone. What she did was this. She spent 3 days moving through Harlan the way she always moved through Harlan, steadily, without hurry, carrying her mending basket or a jar of something or nothing at all. She stopped to talk. She asked how people were managing. She listened carefully to the answer, and when the answer was well enough, she asked a question just past that. She mentioned once to the general store owner that she had heard the Calloway children were down to cornmeal and not much of it. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, with no expectation built into the sentence. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved 2 sacks of flour to the side of the counter and said he'd been meaning to send some things out that way. She said that was good of him. She mentioned, to a woman 3 houses down, that Mrs. Greer was managing the winter alone since her husband had been sick, and that her preserves from summer hadn't lasted as long as they'd needed to. The woman paused in her doorway. Then she went back inside and came out with 2 jars of apple butter and a side of cured pork and asked if she was heading that direction. She said she could be. It went like that. A word here, a jar there, a suggestion framed so plainly that the person receiving it felt they had thought of it themselves. She did not correct that impression. By February, both families had enough. Not comfort, enough. The children were fed. The adults were thin but standing. Spring came late that year, the way it always did in the high country. The passes opened in April and the supply wagons came through and Harlan went back to its ordinary noise. No one made a speech. No one held a gathering. The Greer family sent a jar of honey in June with no note attached, and she set it on the kitchen shelf next to the others. 9 years. The twins turned 13 in the autumn of 1882, and by then Harlan had settled around them the way snow settles around a fence post, gradually, without announcement, until you could not quite picture the landscape without it. The quieter one had taken to the church on Sunday mornings. Not the preacher's doing. He had enough to manage with the adults. She had simply begun sitting with the younger children during the long stretch before service, and at some point, sitting had become teaching, and teaching had become the thing the smaller children expected and counted on. She used no primer he had bought her, no formal text. She used the method she knew, a question asked plainly. Then silence held long, enough for the answer to come from the child rather than from her. Anyone watching would have recognized it. It was exactly how she had learned to read at that kitchen table, years before she understood she was being taught. The one who collected stones still kept her pile on the windowsill. 7 stones now, smooth and particular, each one chosen for reasons she did not explain. They sat beside the tin candle holder, which had not moved in 9 years. Dented on one side, the metal worn pail at the base where it had been handled so many mornings. She had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a door frame or a staircase. It was simply where the light came from. He noticed it. He was standing in the kitchen doorway one Sunday in October, his coat still on, watching his daughters move through the house with the ease of people who belonged somewhere completely. The quieter one was reading at the table, her finger tracing a line she would use with the children next week. The other was at the window, turning a new stone in her palm, deciding whether it was worth keeping. She was at the stove. She did not look up. He stood there longer than he needed to. Long enough that if she had turned, she would have seen something in his face that he had not yet put into words, and perhaps never would. Long enough that the quieter one glanced up from her book, looked at him, looked at her stepmother's back, and looked back down at her page with the careful neutrality of a girl who understood more than she let on. Then he took off his coat and hung it on the peg by the door. He sat down at the table. She set a cup in front of him without being asked, the way she had done for 9 years, and went back to what she was doing. Outside, the aspens had gone gold. The quieter one married first, in the spring of 1889. The man she chose was from a ranch 12 miles east of Harlan. Steady, a little formal, the kind of man who took off his hat indoors without being reminded. He came to the house 3 times before he asked, and each time he left, she stood in the kitchen and did not say anything for a moment, and then went back to what she had been doing. When the proposal came, the quieter twin received it at the kitchen table, and her stepmother was in the next room, and afterward she came in and sat down, and they talked for a long time with the candle between them. The dress took 6 weeks, white cotton with small pearl buttons at the wrist, a collar that lay flat and plain, no excess. The quieter one tried it on in the bedroom on a morning in late April, and she stood very still while the last adjustments were made, and when she turned to see herself in the glass, she put one hand over her mouth and did not speak, and neither did her stepmother. And the moment passed quietly between them the way important things had always passed between them. The ceremony was small. The church had its steeple by then, a plain wooden one, and the light came through a high window at an angle and lay in a stripe across the floor. When it was over, they ate at the long table behind the general store, bread and cold chicken and a cake she had made the day before. The man sat beside her at the table, and at some point in the evening, without looking over, without marking the moment with anything at all, his hand moved to the back of her chair. It stayed there through the rest of the supper. 2 years later, in October of 1891, the other twin married in the same church, a man who had come to Harlan with the railroad survey, and then simply stayed. He laughed easily and collected stones himself, which is perhaps why she had chosen him. That dress had a slightly longer hem to account for the October chill, and a pale blue ribbon at the waist, and it took 7 weeks because that twin had opinions and expressed them freely. At the reception, which was louder than the first, the man found a chair beside her near the edge of the room. The room went on around them, voices and fiddle and the twins' laughter. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, low enough that no one else could hear, both of them, groan. She looked at the twins on the floor. "Yes," she said, "both of them." His hand found the back of her chair. The first grandchild arrived in the spring of 1900. The quieter twin's husband came to the door before dawn, his hat in both hands, and she was already dressed. She had heard something in the way the house had gone quiet. The night before, a particular quality of waiting, and she had set water on and laid out clean cloth without being asked. The child was born by the time the sky turned pale. A boy. He weighed what a good winter melon weighs, and he had his mother's serious expression from the first hour. She handed him to his mother and stood back. The quieter twin looked up at her with something that could not be named, and she pressed her lips together once and turned to clean the basin. That was how it began. By 1902, there were 4 grandchildren. The other twin had 2 girls in quick succession, both of them loud and certain, which surprised no one who knew their mother. The house shifted. Sunday dinners stretched the table past its designed capacity. Children appeared underfoot at hours that had previously been quiet. The man built a low bench along the side wall of the kitchen, so there was somewhere to put them, and the bench was rarely empty on weekends. She moved through all of it without apparent effort, though effort is what it was. There was simply no performance in it. At night, when the house had settled and the man had gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with a small ledger she kept in the bottom drawer of the sideboard. The tin candle holder burned on the windowsill. She wrote in a hand that was careful and small. Names, dates, brief notes in the margin. March brought flour and salt pork to the Halloran widow, youngest child feverish. July sat with Grace Mercer 3 evenings, husband not expected to recover. September mended coats for the Vasquez children before winter, no charge. They will need boots before they need charity. And I told her so. The ledger had begun years before, when she was not sure herself why she was writing things down. Perhaps because someone should know what had been needed and what had been given. Perhaps because the keeping of it made the work feel less like it was disappearing into silence. She did not show it to anyone. It was not written for showing. She would close it before bed, return it to the bottom drawer, and carry the candle upstairs. The man was always already asleep. She would set the candle on the nightstand and sit a moment in the quiet, and then she would lie down beside him. Outside, Harlan was asleep. February came in without announcement. The cold had been building for weeks, slow and certain, and by the first week of the month it had settled over Harlan like a hand pressed flat. The ground was iron. The sky before dawn was the color of old pewter, and nothing moved in it. She woke before the light. She did not know why. She seldom did on the mornings it happened. Some instinct or habit, or the particular silence that came before snow. She dressed in the dark without waking him and carried her shoes downstairs in her hand, the way she had done for 31 years when she did not want to disturb the house. The kitchen was cold. She built the fire low and lit the candle in the tin holder, dented on one side, the same as it had always been, and set it on the sill. She took the ledger from the bottom drawer of the sideboard and sat. She had not planned to open it, but she did, to a page near the beginning, and then she sat reading in the candlelight while the fire built slowly behind her. The names were all there, the dates, the small notes in the margin in her careful hand. 30 years of winters, 30 years of what had been needed and what had been given. She turned the pages slowly, not looking for anything particular. Just reading the way you read something you have carried so long you have stopped noticing the weight of it. She did not hear him on the stairs. He came to the kitchen door and stopped. She was sitting with her back to him, the candle burning, the ledger open in front of her, snow beginning to come down outside the window in the dark. He stood there for a moment, long enough that she might have felt him, and then he came in and sat down across the table from her. She looked up. She closed the ledger. He set his hand flat on the table between them, palm down, fingers easy, the way a man sets something down that he means to leave there. She looked at his hand. Then she placed hers on top of it. Outside, the snow was coming down over Harlan. Not the first snow of the season, but the heaviest. The kind that would still be on the ground in the morning, covering the road, the porch, rail, the bare yard where the twins had once collected stones. Upstairs, their grandchildren slept. The candle burned in the dented tin holder on the windowsill. The fire ticked low in the grate. She did not take her hand away. Nothing was said that needed saying.